Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another round of sound. This is the #1 Cochran Sports Showdown. I'm Bob Pompeani. Always appreciate you tuning in. We have a lot to get into, including baseball. It's opening day. The Pirates begin Thursday. What expectations, if at all, do they have going into the season? Tyson Alualu doesn't about face. But the #1 topic tonight on the #1 Cochran Sports Showdown will be the Red Hot Penguins, who are 2 out of second and could tie the Islanders tomorrow night. Here is your panel. Josh Yohe, who does a great job covering the Penguins with The Athletic, is here tonight, as well as Chris Mack, host of the Fan Morning Show on 93.7 The Fan, and Jeff Hathhorn, who does it all at 93.7 The Fan. Jack of just about every trade there is up there. And just, Jeff, I'll start with you on this one. Just because it's the Penguins, it's coming up on a trade deadline. And here they are now surging and moving potentially into a second place, very close to first place. So if you're Ron Hextall or Brian Burke, things have changed in the last 6 weeks. How do you go about your business at the trade deadline?
Well, whatever they said, whatever they brought, it worked. Whatever message they got to the team, it has absolutely worked if it's their reasoning as to why that they're playing so much better. I think what you want to do is maybe add a little bit of depth to that forward line, get a little size, someone that can be tough to play against in the postseason. But I think as much as anything, it's the Penguins' mentality that's so key for them. Even with all the injuries, it's been their mentality that's been so good. But that's where I think I would look to add is maybe a bottom six size forward.
Yeah, Jeff, I agree with that. What the bottom six has done the last few games has been pretty miraculous, and I give them credit, especially what the Penguins did against a really good Islanders team last night with a roster that looked like half of an AHL roster at the forward unit. That's great that they're pulling it off right now. It's not really sustainable. I think Ron Hextall knows it. Brian Burke told me the other day Hextall is working the phones pretty feverishly right now. They need bottom six help. There's no question. Reinforcements are on the way. That's great. I wouldn't have told you a month ago that I thought this had a chance to be a Stanley Cup team. I feel a little differently right now. You cannot deny how well they have played. Evgeny Malkin will be back at some point, I believe, in the next 2 or 3 weeks. Everyone else will be back, but that bottom six needs to be better if the Penguins are to get through the Capitals or the Bruins or the Islanders just in the first 2 rounds. But even that we're talking about it is a really big deal because this team has taken enormous strides in the last month. I can't believe how well they're playing.
Yeah, and I agree, guys, especially in light of your conversation with Brian Burke last week, Josh. I think we know that they're going to try to add some sort of depth to those bottom 2 forward lines. The Radim Zohornas and the Frederick Gaudreaus of the world are great stories, and they're fun to watch. And maybe they can, contribute here and there during the playoffs because there will always be injuries. But this team, I think the most interesting part for me will be not whether they add before the deadline or not, because I think they will add a piece or two to fortify that bottom six, and that may mean a left-handed defenseman going out, Marcus Pettersson perhaps. But what'll be interesting to me is as they start to get all these people back in the lineup, and you touched on this as well this morning in your piece after last night's game, Josh, do they continue to play the same smart, responsible style of Mike Sullivan hockey once they're completely healthy again? They've done a great job of that since they lost some of these key pieces to the lineup, including their entire second line. I'm curious to see if they continue that going forward.
I think that's an excellent point, and I was going to get to that too. But Josh, I'll ask you this. What do you have to give up? All right, a lot of people say Pettersson, but let's say that Ron Hextall cites a need for something else, maybe a little bit bigger than a bottom six kind of acquisition. What would you give up?
Well, it's fascinating because Burke told me the other day we're not trading draft picks and we're not trading the kids. And what he meant by kids was Samuel Pullen, Nathan Legarrier, and P.O. Joseph. So, okay, that's great for the future. But what exactly would entice teams to trade with the Penguins right now? Not a whole lot if you go by that definition. Chris mentioned Pettersson. He's obviously a guy who makes sense because you have Joseph there who can slide in. We know how good he is. We've already seen it. I'm sure the Penguins would be delighted to trade Mike Matheson, even though he hasn't been horrible. It still is a horrible contract, and I don't know that he's the kind of player you would trust in the playoffs. So they're willing to move those two. I don't know how much Pettersson would really get you in return. You could trade him. You could get a bottom six piece, I suppose. But you could also make an argument that trading a pretty good 24-year-old defenseman for a bottom six piece that you might have for a year or two doesn't make a whole lot of sense. That's why Ron Hextall is a little handcuffed right now, in my opinion. And I know he wants to make a move, but he's in a really tough spot right now because he does not want to go into the Jim Rutherford program and keep selling the future.
No, and I think it's a valid point, and you have to add to the fact, too, that so many teams are still involved in the postseason. How many teams are true sellers besides Buffalo? There may be one or two or three others that are already talking about selling. But there are teams on the edge. There's teams like the Rangers. What do they do at the trade deadline here coming up here in a couple of weeks? What's their position in coming up here in the next few days? Can they get on a little bit of a run? And there are other teams in a similar position. I just don't know if with the competition for a player like that, if the Penguins are going to have the collateral that some of the other teams are going to have.
Chris?
Yeah, I don't think they do, guys. I think, to Josh's point about Pettersson and Matheson, yeah, it might be nice to unload Matheson and his contract, and it might be nice to move Pettersson, but there are drawbacks to that move as well. And I just think, Ron Hextall has shown, I think, just by virtue of the fact that he hasn't done much of anything since he took over the job, that he's going to be much more patient. I can imagine what Jim Rutherford would be doing right now with this many top six forwards out of the lineup. He'd have juggled things around about 3 times by now in an effort to find somebody to plug one of those holes.
Yeah, it's interesting. You see Gaudreau, you see Zahorna, you also see Anthony. It kind of brings you back to 2016, when they got contributions from guys like Wilson, Kuhnhackl, Rust, and Cherry. I want to ask this and make it quick answers, guys, because we're up against it. The goaltending has been terrific. There was a time when we all sat here and talked about acquisition of a veteran because, boy, those guys aren't playing too well. Goaltending position as it is, which means it could be great. All of a sudden it could change. Just ask Carter Hart. So, Josh, would they still be in the market if they had an opportunity to bring in another goaltender?
Boy, we would need a whole segment to talk about Carter Hart, but that's another story for another day. They'd be in trouble if they needed a goaltender right now because they have nothing they want to give up, and they don't need a goalie. Did they want one 6 weeks ago? Yeah, they talked about it. During that weird transition period between Rutherford and Hextall, Mario Lemieux and others in the organization actively talked about maybe bringing in a veteran. Things have changed. They have one of the best goaltending situations in the league.
They could change again, though, is what I'm saying. You never know. I mean, we've seen Carter Hart.
But that's a chance they have to take.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think barring an injury, I don't see them going after a goalie. They've got arguably the best tandem in the league right now. They're playing well in the defense, and they're playing responsible in front of these goaltenders. And one other thing about Jim Rutherford, I know we all take shots here or there. Guy won 2 Stanley Cups, and when he had a core, he went for it. So I don't want to criticize him too much here.
Yeah, I agree.
Oh, yeah, and what I said before, Jeff, wasn't really a criticism of Jim Rutherford. It was just a fact that he would have dealt everything he could in his hand by now to have tried to make some kind of move to fortify that forward depth with all the injuries. But as for goaltending, you got 2 of the hottest guys in the league on the same roster right now. I don't touch it.
Again, I'm only saying that in case it changes, and then you may be left without one of those situations. That's going to be interesting to watch as well. We're going to take a break here. When we come back, we're going to talk about the Steelers, who got a gift last night, an early gift, an unexpected gift. We'll also talk about the league expanding for the first time in 43 years. They're going to add a game, good or bad, for the NFL. That's next right here on the #1 Cochran Sports Showdown.